All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session, Rob's 5.5 Tips for Designing Great Workshop Presentations. I'm Rob, so that comes in handy for this session, and welcome. Also here are Astrid Leiden, who's in charge of professional development for the Department of Education's ABE system, and Wendy Herr, who works with LANS. So we're glad to have everybody here and everybody interested in how to give great presentations. A little bit about the history of this presentation. I work for Literacy Minnesota. It's my job to support the use of volunteers and promote the use of volunteers in adult education. And so I do a lot of tutor training, but I also try to encourage my coworkers to lead presentations at conferences, staff meetings, things like that. And when I make that ask, some staff are like, no problem, anytime you ask. And other staff are like, never talk to me again. I'll file a restraining order if you come near me. And at one point I had a group of staff say, you know, you're always asking us to do presentations. You forget that you do presentations all the time, but we don't. So could you do a presentation on how to do presentations? And I thought, well, that's a fair ask. So I'm like, when do you want me to do it? And they're like, how about the next staff meeting? And I'm like, how much time do I have? And they said 10 minutes. Is that enough? And I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll go with it. So that was a genesis of this presentation. Since then, I've done it a lot of times for our staff. I've also done it at Minnesota ABE events like Summer Institute. I've done it at national conferences like Pro Literacy, and exciting to do it here today. And part of the reason we're doing it is because we know that some of you are preparing your presentations for Summer Institute. And so we timed it so that this presentation would be in that time when you're probably preparing your presentations. And then we'll also have a recording for the people who can't make it today. So our agenda for today is I'm going to share my 5.5 tips, and I'm going to give you a chance to reflect upon your own experience as presenters. I'm looking over the list of people. I'm like, I've gone to your presentations. You're great. Even if you haven't done a lot of presentations, you've probably been to a lot of presentations and you know what you like and what you don't like. And so we really want to build on that expertise. I want to give you some chance to apply the tips that we talk about to your reality. How does this apply to the work that you do? And then finally, I want to share some great resources that the field has available for you for putting together presentations. And all of these will be in the slides when you get them. So, you know, doing a presentation on how to do presentation is a uniquely terrifying concept because you're expecting this to be a really good presentation. And I hope it will be. I've done a lot of presentations. Some of them have gone really well and some of them haven't gone well. And when I do post-mortem on the ones that don't go well, 9 out of the 10 times I realize that why it didn't go well is because I didn't follow one of my 5.5 tips, and gives me some mixed emotions there. It's like, well, you are a horrible human being, Rob, but hey, those tips are good. So just encouraging you to do as I say, not as I don't always do, or however that works. So I try to do these things, but I don't always succeed. So there are a gabillion tips that we could share today, and they're all really valid and all really important, but really had to narrow it down into something that was manageable. So I picked 2 criteria. And the first one is what tips are easiest to do, easiest to implement. We could do a multi-week session on how to build experiential learning following Kolb's model. That would be exciting, but you probably wouldn't do it because it's not quick and easy. So hopefully the tips we talk about today will be quick and easy, or relatively quick and easy. And then I really wanted to focus on workshop design rather than presentation skills. So this isn't Toastmasters where we talk about when to walk across the room and you're making a transition and things like that. That stuff tends to be paralyzing if you think about it too much. So I'll just say, be your authentic self when you're presenting, share your authentic expertise, and people will respond to you. Don't worry too much about the presentation part. Focus on the design. All right, so we're going to jump into the tips. And the first one, and we're going to call this tip 1/2, and that is establish your credibility. And this is one of those tips where this isn't important to me as a workshop participant, but I know that it's often important for other workshop participants. They want to know, why should I be listening to you? So it's always best practice to share, why are you the one with the camera on? Why are people listening to you? And so tip 1/2 is establish your credibility. So just share some of mine. One, I've worked for Literacy Minnesota. I've done a lot of trainings. I've been in the field for 30 some years. When I had my 30th anniversary, somebody added it up, and it turns out I have trained the number of people equal or exceeding the population of Mankato. So that is a pretty cool statistic. I'm proud of that. So done a lot of these. Perhaps more importantly, I have read a lot of evaluation comments. Oh, so many evaluation comments. I joke that I get like 500 evaluation or performance reviews a year. And people are usually very positive. I'm not a masochist. I wouldn't do this for 30 years if people beat me up too much, but they're also pretty honest, and they will share what they like and what they don't like. And so what I'm pulling from today is what people have said they like or they don't like. So our warm-up activity today is going to be a little bit about sharing our expertise. So what I'm going to have you do in the chat is share out 2 pieces of information, okay? And don't do it until I say go. But the first one is 2 things that you are an expert at. And I would like one of them to be work-related, okay? And one of them to be hobby related, so life outside of literacy. When I do this activity in Minnesota, people sometimes get paralyzed because there is a word that we don't like, and that is expert. Oh my gosh, I'm not an expert at this. I only do it 5 days a week, all year long, right? So we're going to use good Minnesota language here. Okay, share 2 things that you are pretty good at. That's a Minnesota nice way of looking at it. So I'll share mine. Gardening. That's a picture of my garden from last year. Not quite as good this year with the heat and the drought, but that is one thing that I like to do outside of work. And then I shared that I do a lot of tutor trainings. Okay, so in the chat, go ahead and share one thing that you are pretty good at, one that's work related, and one that's hobby related. So I always find I'm looking at the hobby related ones. Those are always fun. Running, stranded knitting. Leah, what is stranded knitting as opposed to non-stranded knitting?
Stranded knitting means you have 2 or more colors that you're knitting in one row.
Okay, cool. Got a couple bakers here. That's cool. Astrid, what kind of dancing?
Tap dancing is my current endeavor.
Someday Astrid's going to give me a tap dancing lesson. Wendy's an expert at folding and color coordinating laundry. Pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. when I do this at national conferences, people in New York, they're like, yeah, we're experts. We'll claim expertise on anything. Here in Minnesota, we are humble people. Part of the reason I did this with my coworkers is to remind them that they are indeed experts. And as I said, they're like, I'd be like, can you do a session on teaching ESL? And they're like, oh, I don't know anything about teaching ESL. I only do it 5 days a week for the last 45 years. We have expertise, and we have that expertise that comes from doing it every day, actually being in the field. And that is what the people that we present to really respond to. It's like, this is what I did in my class. This is what I did in my program. That carries more weight than this is what I did in my PhD program. Another thing I want to say about expertise is sometimes you don't personally have the expertise, but you work with people who do. And I did a presentation in Texas earlier this year, and I really relied upon the expertise of my colleagues, Jessica, Susan, and Leah, who are doing digital stuff and know a lot about digital resilience. And so as I did my presentation, I called them out and highlighted that the expertise that I was sharing today is based on the expertise that my colleagues have from doing this every day. All right, so let's move on to tip number 1. And some of you are mathing and are like, isn't this tip 1.5? Don't go there. We're going to start now with whole numbers. And so tip number 1, less is more. Plan and promise accordingly. I have never done a presentation where I haven't had too much content. And I've never gone to a presentation when the presenter hasn't had too much content. And so my recommendation is to really scale it back as you're preparing the presentation, as you're coming up with your workshop title, your workshop description, promise what you're actually going to be delivering. And this becomes more and more important as we develop shorter and shorter attention spans. Some of you remember going to 6-hour workshops or 3-hour workshops or 2-hour workshops. And now people want us to do 45-minute workshops and have 3 breaks in there. So I think we're doing these shorter and shorter sessions. And so we want to make sure that we plan the appropriate amount of content. Last slide, I showed my coworker, Susan WB, Susan Wentenkamp Brandt, office mate. We have a lot of great conversations. She's brilliant. And she shared one of my favorite quotes with me. And that is, if your session has the same title as a PhD program, you have planned too much. And I've gone to sessions on teaching reading, probably not going to get there in the 45 minutes or 2 hours that we have. Okay. So if your session has the same title as a PhD program, you have probably planned too much. So give me a couple examples of how I've taken big topics and broken them down, starting with today's training. We could talk about training. That is a big topic. You can get a PhD in training. So let's break that down. How to be a good presenter. Still pretty good, big, lots of things we could talk about. How about designing? Tips for designing good presentations. Okay. And then my shtick is to have that number. I love having a number in my title. 5.5 tips for designing workshop presentations. There are a million out there, but I can promise you that in the time we have together, I am going to talk about 5.5 of those. Another example I've done, reading, again, PhD topic, let's break it down. Comprehension, okay, still pretty big, okay. Post-reading activities, now we're getting manageable, and then throwing in my number shtick, 5 great post-reading activities. So you're gonna walk away not talking about every post-reading activity there is, but we are gonna cover 5 of them. So let's look at a topic, and let's go back to people's hobbies. And I want to do baking, since we had a couple people do baking. So again, I don't know if you get PhDs in baking, but you can certainly spend a lot of time in school learning about baking, a lot of time in life learning about baking. what would be a title for a 1-hour session having to do with baking? In 1 hour, you could teach me something about baking in that time frame. Okay. So maybe we have how to make chocolate chip cookies. That might be a session. In the chat box, share out any other ideas for a 1-hour session on baking that you could manageably, realistically be successful at. Baking with teenagers. Make 1, eat 2. Now I'm intrigued by both of those. 5 strategies. Astrid's learning that shtick. Keeping yeast alive. Oh, got a colon in there, Nick. That is the sign of a great presentation title. All right. Good. So switch to other topics and just for your own hobbies, come up with a title for a 1-hour session relating to your area of work or hobby expertise. See what people have. Astrid, what's going to be in our 1-hour tap dance lesson? Again, oh, Leah's got that colon in there. Good job. There's the number 7 things to share with new staff. I like that one because, you know, there's a gabillion things you could share, but 7, you've met your goal. They've gotten their 7. So that's great. I was at a national event with some other people who do professional development, and they were saying that one of their favorite uses for ChatGPT or artificial intelligence is to generate workshop titles. And I haven't done this yet, but they said they'll go and say, generate a title for a 1-hour workshop on stranded knitting. And they've been pretty happy with the titles that come up. Give me an outline for a 1-hour session on stranded knitting. They've been pretty happy with the outlines that I've tried. So I'm gonna try that, haven't done it yet, but tip from other people. All right, so that was tip number 1, which was plan and promise accordingly because less is more. My next tip is be a good tour guide. And I said earlier that I don't care if people tell me what their expertise is, I trust them, but it is really important as a workshop participant for me to have people who are good tour guides, who are gonna make me feel comfortable in the session, that I don't feel like we're lost, that this presentation's going all over the place, that they don't know what they're talking about. So I'm looking for any of those tips that people do, or any of those things that people do to be a good tour guide. So just some general things, when you want to assure people that you know where you're going, that you're in control of this presentation. You want to tell people what they're going to be doing. On today's tour, we are going to be seeing the Colosseum. On today's tour, we are going to be seeing ghosts or whatever the tour is about. On today's session, we're going to learn how to do stranded knitting. Big one, tell people why they are going to be doing it. We're doing this activity because it's really important for you to do this in your class. We're going to do this activity because I have found that students really like it when you, so it's sort of the sales pitch. Why are we doing this? How are they going to be better? Tell people where they are. Okay, especially in longer presentations. Okay, we just did tip number 1. Now we're on tip number 2. So just those internal markers of where we are. So some just practical things for how to do it. One is have an agenda. People love agendas. They can look at it. This is what we're going to do. Here are the 5 tips. Here are the 3 tips. Here are the 7 tips. Post it on the wall. Make it a handout. Always have it available so that people can go to it. You ever notice how people love to check off things when they have accomplished it? Okay, we've seen that site. Now we're moving on to the next site. A copy of slides. People love having this copy of the slides. Lots more people are asking them for them ahead of time so that they can go through them during the session. As a presenter, how do you feel about giving your slides out ahead of time? I will tell you, I don't like doing that for a couple reasons, but in the chat box, share out how you feel as a presenter about giving your slides out ahead of time. Harmony's fine with it. Better person than I am. Yeah, Leah doesn't like it. I have the same thing. Why would they come if they already have the slides? Have found that if you send out slides ahead of time, people don't come because they have the slides. Yeah, Astrid understands why it's good, but people are distracted. Justine's practical. It means I have to have the slides ahead of time. That's a lot of work, a lot of pressure. So it sounds like Wendy's coming on the good side. I understand the pros and the cons of it. As a presenter, I struggle. People look ahead. Often the jokes are in there. And so I tend to resist handing them out ahead of time. I certainly make them available afterwards. One thing that you can do is a note-taking sheet or annotated slides or partial slides where people have to put in their notes. And Wendy Sweeney from Panda is brilliant at this. She always has a note-taking sheet that she shares so that people can go through and fill in the missing pieces. And so pop the link in the chat. It's going to ask me to make a copy. So she very nicely shared an example of the note-taking sheet that she uses so that people can fill in the blanks as she goes through the presentation. And so you have the link, you can make a copy, just an example. And I love she does it. It's sort of extra work. It's like, geez, I just got my slides together in time for the presentation. To do this is even more work, but it is, I think, a really, really good idea. You see how Wendy is very, very detailed in her note-taking sheet. I'll share the one that I put together for this presentation. So it's just a little sheet that you can keep track. Okay, it gives people that sense of, okay, I have a task. We're going through these tips in order. This makes me feel good. And so even if you don't want to go through all the work that Wendy does, giving a basic cheat sheet like this is a way to keep people focused. I did a presentation at a conference and way more people came than I was expecting. So I ran out of this handout and people are like, we don't have a copy of the handout. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure you can replicate this on a piece of paper, but people wanted that form that they could fill out because I think that gave them some comfort of us working through the presentation. All right, let's get back to the slides. Next tip is internal review. So simply saying, okay, we have covered tip number 1 and number 2, and next we're going to be moving on to tip number 3. I think that just reassures the audience that you have control of the presentation. 5-minute warning. In 5 minutes, we will be taking a break. And I really learned to do this helping out in our preschool, because preschoolers are really bad about transitions. And so if you say, okay, it's break time, they're not willing to stop what they're doing. I think we are all just really big preschoolers, and it's hard for us to transition as well. So giving people those timing things is great. We're going to take a break in 5 minutes. We're going to be stopping this activity in 10 minutes. Again, lets them know what's going on and assures them that you are in control of the day. Time checks. Okay. Lets people know that you're not running out of time, that you know that you are on schedule. Okay. Even if you have to say, you know, we're running a little bit behind, but after break, we will catch up. That makes people feel comfortable. Oops. So in the chat, share out, are there any other things not on this list that you have done or you have seen done to help people sort of feel like they are safe in your hands or the presenter's hands as you go through the presentation? Steal some ideas here. Or if there's one on the screen that you really like, you can share that out. Leah, the internal review is just say, okay, you know, we've done tips 0.5 and 1. We're in the middle of tip 2. Next, we're moving on to tip 3. So just let people know where they are in the tour. Many of us are old enough to remember life before PowerPoint. And when PowerPoint came out, my life as a presentee, as an audience member, became much more comfortable because I knew that people had at least spent a little time preparing their presentation, and they had slides, and those slides were going to be in order. And that gave me great comfort because I had been to a lot of presentations where it was pretty clear that the presenter was making it up on the spot. And so slides let me know that they spent some time putting them together. What was before PowerPoint? I know some of you children, look it up on the internet. Transparencies. Don't miss transparencies. Overheads, yep. All right. So we've done tip 0.5 and tip 1, which was less is more, and tip 2, which is be a good tour guide. Now we're moving on to tip number 3, which is probably most participants' favorite thing. And that is incorporating those interactive activities. If there is one comment that comes up the most on evaluations is how much they love the interactive activities, how much they wish we would have done more interactive activities, anything that gets away from just sitting and listening to lectures. And for me, one of the hardest parts of webinars is the difficulty both as a participant and as a presenter, incorporating those interactive activities, because logistically, it just is harder than turn to your neighbor and talk. I was doing a presentation for some group, and I sent out a sort of a pre-survey asking, what would you like me to cover? And I was thinking in terms of content. What content would you like me to cover? And I got this comment back. The only suggestion I would request, not sure if he'll do it, was to make the session interactive as opposed to a lecture base. And so they didn't care what the content was, just try to make it interactive. And then I just like how fatalistic they were. Not sure he'll do it. You know, they say they will, but they never do. So try to be as interactive as possible. So just some tips, turn and talk. And if we were in person, so easy to do turn and talk activities. I remember talking to my colleague, Andrea Eckelberger, and when the pandemic ended and she was able to go back and teach in person, she said, I never realized how much I missed using the words turn to your neighbor and talk. Just the easiest interactive activity, okay? A lot harder to type your response in the chat box. Small group discussion can be replicated in breakout rooms, but just give them chance to talk, to process. Just doing some tell, show, do. So I'm going to tell you about something, I'm going to show you it, and then I'm going to do it. Certainly, if you are learning baking, you're probably hearing about it, watching it, and then doing it. Reading isn't that much different from baking. It's something that we do. And so people should have a chance to hear about it, see it, and then do it. People love experiential activities or sensitivity activities. We do this a lot in our tutor training where we teach students, teach participants a short dialogue in another language. We do something called trogs where they have to read a passage backwards and with some nonsense words. And I tell you, when I run into people 5 years later, they say, yeah, I went to your training and I really remember when you tried to have me speak Farsi and how difficult that was. And that really stuck with me. So experiential sensitivity activities really, really stick. Just an opportunity to practice a skill is great. Okay, we just talked about teaching sight words. Now you're going to practice doing this with a partner. And then role play. If you want to invoke fear in people, nothing does it better than saying, now we are going to do a role play. People just cringe at the thought of role play. But I've also found that once they get over that initial cringe, they really get into the role play, and it tends to be a pretty popular activity. All right, so we're going to do our version of a turn and talk, which is type your answers in the chat. And what I'd like you to do is share out 1 or 2 really cool interactive activities that you have done or that you have seen. So Padlet, you know, used to be get up and write on a big piece of flip chart paper. Padlet activities replicate that online. Polls, those are great. What else have people seen, done, enjoyed? Yep, getting them to move around the room. Mixing up the groups a bit, learning new people. Mingle activities is a great. Find someone who, and oftentimes you're modeling an activity that they can do in the classroom if you're doing teacher training or tutor training. What else? Small group breakouts are great. Gallery walk. So people put their responses and then everyone gets around and reads other people's responses. Post-its on posters. That's old school. Collaborative work in Google. Poll surveys, jigsaws. Again, they can be everything from turn to your neighbor and talk, work in a small group to do an activity. And I don't think I have ever read an evaluation form that said too many interactive activities. I have from college students who are having to go through the training as part of service learning, but for regular folks, we really appreciate that interactive piece, especially for teachers, because we're not used to having to sit there and listen. We want to do something. All right, we're going to move on to tip number 4. And tip number 4 is help them make the leap. And this is a huge one. And it's probably the one that Susan WB and Megan and Andrea and the people who have done trainings with me have complained about the most, people's difficulty making the leap. And that just tells me that it's my job to help people make the leap because they're not able to do it themselves. Okay. So I'll give you some examples of people not being able to make the leap. Okay. Comments like this: you're in a metro program, I'm in a greater Minnesota program, this won't work, right? I can't take what you're talking about, the examples you're giving them, and make them apply to my situation. Or you work in a big program, I work in a small program, this won't work. You teach on Thursdays, I teach on Wednesdays, this won't work. Okay. The average height of your students is 5'7", the average height of my students is 5'6", this won't work. Okay. And a couple of them on the screen are made up examples, but you get the idea. People just struggle making that leap. And so again, if people aren't able to do it, it becomes our job to help them make that leap. I have a great quote from Bergen Young, who used to work at Literacy Minnesota. And she said, move from this is how I did it to this is how you can do it. And again, because people aren't seeing that or knowing how to do it automatically, you need to help. So just set up the expectation. I'll say, I'm going to talk about this, and I want you to think about how could you do this in the work that you do, or I want you to think about 3 things that I talk about today that you can apply in your work. So really challenge them and let them know that they're expected to take what you're talking about and apply it to the work that they are doing. Give representative case studies. And so if you are working in a program that has 20 students in, do a case study for a program or a class that has 5 students in. And so you can show how something you do in a big class can also be done in a small class. So using those case studies where you show them how to do what you're recommending across lots of different situations is valuable. How will you use this? Again, talked about setting up that expectation, but how will you use this is a great exit ticket activity as you wrap up, asking people how they're going to use it. Make a plan, even more formal, where you take that next step, you give them time in the presentation to make that plan. And then another good exit ticket activity, use, adapt, ignore. So at the end of the session, ask them, what did we talk about today that you can use? What did we talk about that you can adapt, and how are you going to do that? And then what can you ignore? And it's okay to say, you know, not everything and every presentation is valuable to me. Doesn't mean the presentation was bad. It just means that not everything applies to everybody. I'm going to go back to, let's see if I still have it up here. So I want to go back to the managing uncertainty sheet. Are you seeing that on the screen? I just lost my backup screen, so I want to make
Yes,
sure
Rob.
you are. Thank you.
Yep.
And so I just want to scroll down, and I noticed that Wendy, in addition to having this nice outline of what they'll be covering, note-taking sheet, she has a make a plan. And so they break out into groups. So got that interactive activity, and they are talking about how they can take what she talked about and apply it to their everyday work. And so nice example of helping them make that leap. So in the chat, if you could share out what have you done or what have you seen that has helped facilitate people being able to make the leap? Again, stealing ideas from your experience. I also think this is probably something we need to do with our learners as well. So how are you going to take what we talked about today and apply it? Okay. Talking with a partner, breakout room, applying to different settings. Differentiated tasks, which is nice. Can take some work ahead of time as a presenter to do that, but making sure that you have something for a one-room schoolhouse program, something from a big program, something from a small program, high level, low level, so forth. All right, so we are on to the final tip from Rob, and that is cut, don't rush, because you know you've evolved in a situation where you go, oh my gosh, we're running out of time, got so much here, so got this these activities, but we don't have time to, we're just going to go through really fast. And oh, there's a video. Oh, the video is great. It's one of the best videos I've ever seen. No time for it, and we're going to just go through this. Oh, we had this fun activity with Alexander the Terrible, Horrible, Very Bad Day, but I'm going to skip that. Sorry if I'm making you nauseous. Okay, don't have time for this. So I'll be in the handouts. You can look at the slides when we get done. Oh, that's a great video, but we're not going to talk about that either. Where are we? Just you do that, right? You've been to presentations where that's happened. You've probably done that yourself. And so my recommendation is, rather than trying to get through everything, cut stuff out. Less, again, is more. Ideally, you've planned that when you put together your presentation, but also important as you're doing the presentation. Okay. The reality is, you know, plan to be wrong, because unless you're doing a speech that you have timed out to the second, if you're doing interactive activities, if you're asking people questions and they're asking you questions, you probably won't have the timing down perfectly. Every session I do comes in three parts. First third of the presentation, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do not have enough content for this session. What am I going to do? I'm just like panicking. And then you got the second third where you're like, I have the perfect amount. I am a genius. This is working so well. And then you got the last third where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So you're going to be wrong. You should be wrong, and just sort of be prepared to think quick. Building things that you can cut and things that you can add. So always have an extra activity that you can add, and always think about what can I cut. Build in checkpoints. Just internally think about, how am I doing time-wise? Rather than waiting to the end to realize you're out of time, know halfway through, okay, I'm in trouble. I need to start making a plan for what I cut. Cut the content, not the activities. And so you explain something and then you're like, oh, we were going to do an activity. We got a chance to practice this, but we're going to cut that and I'm going to shove more content down your throat. So don't cut the activities, cut the content. Cut down to 5 tips rather than 6 tips, but don't cut the activities that go along with it. Oh, don't cut the video, because the video is always the best part. And if you do cut the video, don't tell people that you just cut the really great video. I'm always like, I really wanted to see that video now more than anything. So don't cut the video. And don't cut the ending. You should have this great, powerful ending that wraps everything up, that gives people a chance to synthesize. Don't cut that. Cut something in the middle. Don't cut the break. Oh, nothing will get you in bad shape with the presenters or the presentees more than cutting the break. I do a presentation for the work that I do with tutors who are working with kids called ABCs of Reading. And I have literally done this presentation 500 times. And so I can tell you within a couple minutes how long it's going to take to do various things. And last summer, I went up and did a training up in Staples, Minnesota for the foster grandparents program. And so the average age in the group was probably 75 or 80 years old. And so we did an activity where you were supposed to stand up and find a partner somewhere else in the room. And normally that takes about 2 minutes. And in this workshop, it took about 15 minutes because there were mobility issues, certainly, but there are also more like, hey, how was your weekend? How's your grandkid? How's the garden going? People just had a talk with everybody. And so it took me 15 minutes to get everybody to find a new partner, sit down and start the activity. And so I knew, one, that I wasn't going to have people find a new partner for every activity. But also I had to cut 15 minutes worth of content. And I thought for sure the world was going to come to an end when they didn't get to hear about this amazing strategy. But rather than rushing through it, I just cut it. Nobody knew anything more. Valuations looked exactly the same as ever. And they were probably just as good of tutors as if they would have been if I would have just rushed through everything. So as painful as it is, in theater, they call it killing your babies. Cut stuff and spend more time on less content. Flip to my notes here. All right, so here we go. Here are the 5.5 tips that I have talked about. And whenever I do this presentation, I think of one of my most beloved colleagues, and that is Marn Frank. And if you've ever worked with Marn, you know that any agenda that she has always has an even number of items. And so for me to have a session that has 5.5 tips, I know that just makes Marn squirm. So we're going to do a little activity called half a tip for Marn. So if we come up with a half a tip, that will get us to 6. It's a whole number. It's an even number. Marn will be so happy that we did this work. So we're going to do this actually as a breakout room activity. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. And we'll do 4 breakout rooms, so about 2 or 3 participants per room. And so what I would like you to do is share a tip that I haven't talked about. And so just so we do review, what were the tips that we've talked about? Not going to go back and show you the slide. I'll type them out in the chat box. What tips have we talked about? Chat them out. Cut, don't rush. Tip number 5. What else? Be a good tour guide. Tip number 2. Establish credibility. There's our tip number half, interactive activities. It's tip number 3. Okay. Get audience to get behind that. That won't work. So may help them make the leap. Tip number 4. Got one more. Tip number 1. No, that was interactive, or no, that was probably be a good tour guide. Tip number 1, have an agenda. We'll go back here. So less is more. So plan accordingly. So I think less is more and cut, don't rush, sort of our bookends. All right, so I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. Looks like 2 to 3 people. So hopefully everyone is out there and awake. I'm going to take 4 minutes with a 1-minute countdown. So 5 minutes. So come up with half a tip between the 2 or 3 of you in the group. Plan to come back with your half a tip. So we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Welcome back. Just waiting for the other groups to wrap up. All right, welcome back, everyone. So if you could, in the chat box, share out what was your half a tip? I like Leah's engage with the audience without getting derailed. That's always a challenge when somebody asks you a question and then you're off talking about that and you lose sort of the focus. I've really noticed that with tech trainings where you have this nice linear presentation and then somebody asks a question and you're kind of off. So that one's tough. Provide those resources. Provide time for questions at the end and provide the contact information. Got that a couple times. So for the resources slide or handouts. Yeah, the whole camera on, camera off thing, I think is something we're still figuring out. In the presentations where presenter leaves it on, it's great. In the presentations where the camera or the presenter turns it off, and that's fine too. I think we're still figuring out the norms there. Let people share their expertise. All right, thanks for doing that. We're going to do a quick poll here. So let's go back to our list. And in the chat box, I would like you to share out of the 5.5 tips that I shared this afternoon. Which one did you find the most valuable? Which one are you going to implement first? Which one resonated most for you? Just a quick informal poll. Chat out the number in the chat box. It's always nice when different things resonate with different people. And again, I'll just say, try to do as I say and try to do. Nobody's perfect at these things, but I think as you start to integrate these tips into your presentation, even the smallest change can make for a better presentation. So one of your half tips was to provide some additional resources, and that's the next segue to the next thing we'll talk about. And I wanted to share out some resources that have been put together to help you design better presentations. And I'll share the links out for these in the chat. And we'll start with the Atlas's presenter information page. Atlas is just brilliant at curating all kinds of great resources. And so they have a nice presenter information page. I'll click on it. And lots of it is specific to if you're doing a presentation for Atlas, this is how you get paid and so forth. But some nice general resources that you can use. So have the link there. One nice resource that the professional development committee for Minnesota ABE put together several years ago and then just updated it quickly is the presenter handbook. So I'm going to click on that and then give you the link. And that is everything you need to know about doing a presentation. So it goes into much greater depth than we talked about this afternoon, but still 10 pages, so it's manageable. One thing that I really wanted to call out is the importance of using open source images as opposed to images that are copyrighted. We've had some issues in the past where people have used just Google, they've done a Google search for a picture. I've done this. We put it in our PowerPoints. That's great if it's a one-time thing, but if your PowerPoint gets shared as after Summer Institute, it gets shared, then that becomes not one-time use and you can get a copyright violation. And Atlas has been dinged several times for presentations that used not open source images. And so really the policy is if you are doing a presentation for a Minnesota ABE event, you will use open source materials. And so the Atlas team has put together a really nice resource. I'll pop this link in the chat. So you have it. It's also in the slides for the presentation. Okay. Just some nice resources for where you can find open source images to use. And then even more valuable, I think, is beware of these sites because these sites, you should be paying to use these images and we can get in trouble if you're not. Lots of things open here. And the last link I want to share with you is a link that Wendy Sweeney, who I've already called our great work, has put together a sheet for how to make presentations more accessible. And this is one of those things where there are just so many things that you can think about how to make a presentation accessible. And she has put together a list of easy to do things from font size, okay, for handouts and presentations and so forth. And so as the PD committee was feeling kind of overwhelmed at all the things we could do, so Wendy put together a nice list of best practices. So don't have to do everything, but again, do one or two things. It will make your presentation more accessible. So these links will all be on the resources slide. And you all should have the links saved on your browser now if you clicked on them. People having trouble getting the last one? That is a great question, and I don't know the answer. Esther, do you know about YouTube videos?
I don't believe there's an issue with YouTube videos. I think they are posted publicly, so I think it's okay to link to them.
Post another link to the last document, see if that one works for you. So if I did more tips, tip number 6 would be, if you can't give them wisdom, give them handouts. And so I'm populating your chat box with some links. One second. Still haven't mastered the link sharing thing. Here we go. So a while back, I wrote an article for ABE Connect, basically summarizing the tips. And so that link is there. And then the last link I will share out is a link to the slides from today's presentation. So as I said, I'm reluctant to share them before, but I'm always happy to share them afterwards.
Rob, the link that you shared just prior to the slides, I think your article, I think you need to change the sharing settings on that one. Access denied on that one.
All right, this one?
Yeah.
Handouts were easier in person, weren't they?
No.
All right. Let's see here. That one work? Nah.
No.
I apologize for that. If you really want it, you can send me email and I will respond, and we'll end with the contact information. So there is my email. And I also encourage you to check out the Literacy Minnesota website. Lots of great resources, especially if you go to the Educator Resources page. I'm just curious, how many people here today are going to be doing a presentation at Summer Institute? Esther is, that's good. Who else? Nick is. Stop sharing for a sec. See if I can get that correct link for y'all. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try one more time with the link to the article. There it is. So hopefully that link will work for you. Yay.
Hey, thank you, Rob.
All right, with that, thank you very much for your attendance today and your participation today. If you're presenting at the Summer Institute, thank you very much. And just always encourage people to present and share your great expertise at the Minnesota ABE events, which we have quite a few of. So we're always looking for experts. With that, wrap it up. If you have any questions, go ahead and chat them out or unmute. Otherwise, again, thanks so much for the work that you're doing. Exciting to see people in person in a couple weeks.